encourage you, if you have not already, which obviously you have, because this is episode 4, and you're committed. You're in it. You're like, man, I'm going to be listening to this podcast until the day that I go to meet my maker, and even then, I hope they stream it to heaven. That's where you're at.
Wonder what the like 4G, is there like 5G in heaven?
Heaven has excellent reception.
The Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi
signal is really good.
Can you imagine, like, you come out of your mansion and you stand on the street and you're like, my Wi-Fi's out! The Apostle Paul's like, we didn't even have Wi-Fi! I always imagine going, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I always imagine going to heaven and like having to explain to like the martyrs what we think suffering is.
Yeah.
I'll be like, yeah, one time I didn't get a really low paying job with a social service agency because I was pro-life, and I'll be sitting next to like Stephen, and he'll be like, one time people killed me with rocks.
We just talked about the stoning of Stephen in church on Sunday. For actually like the past 2 Sundays.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a deep, because he had the whole sermon too.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'll be honest with you.
Like
if I was about to be executed,
sermon and then they stoned him.
Right. Like, if I was about to be executed, I probably wouldn't be sermonizing. I'd probably cry.
Well, they also, like, my pastor talked about how the stoning of Stephen, like, parallels with the death of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Because Stephen's, like, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. I think they knew exactly what they were doing.
But I think most people don't know what they're doing. I think there's always the people in charge know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think the run of the mill, and I think
they don't realize the extent of it.
Let's relate this back to the abortion issue, since we're running this pro-life.
It's the Jesus moment, but like out of order.
So, like, I think if you look at abortion with the general population, so the average person who doesn't know much about it, has never looked into it,
right.
They really don't know what they're doing. Now, is that willful? Yeah. I would say most people don't want to know.
Bliss.
Yeah. Like, if I don't know, I don't have to care, or if I don't know, I don't have to form an opinion. But I would say, I think it's true. I think most people don't realize how impactful things can be, whether you're stoning someone or aborting someone or enslaving someone or whatever the case may be. Because even like, look at the porn industry, men, and I'm not, most porn addicts are men, but still 30% are women. So it's all men. So people don't realize that a lot of the actors and actresses are exploited.
Yeah.
And I think
it's a human trafficking violence. I mean, like, it's...
Yeah. Even the ones that are, willing, more or less, there's always exploitation. And I think if people really realize that, then I would hope, would be like, oh, I can't view this anymore, because by viewing it, I'm supporting it. And by supporting it, I'm supporting the actual pain and suffering of this person. Because you hear a lot like, oh, it's a victimless crime. Well,
right.
It's not. And so, yeah, I think most people don't know, but I think that they could know, especially in our information age.
Right.
And so if you don't know, it's probably because you don't want to know, which is problematic.
Yeah.
It was deep for welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, I was like, so anyway, the stoning of Stephen.
Stoning of Stephen, Wi-Fi in heaven. That's how it started. Anyway, so we're sure you want to do this if you haven't already. So please like and subscribe. So you can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can join our Facebook group, Pro Life Without Borders, and you can follow us. I will be posting it on my social media page, Sarah M. Bowen. You can follow us there, and we will be sending the links out in our Promise of Life Network communications. So there's plenty of opportunities. But definitely subscribe, because then you get to see all of our new content. And just as we have just proven, you don't know what you're going to get.
It's very out of pocket.
It could be anything. Actually, someone told me today, but which, by the way, okay, and in the vein of how we've done this before, we have a new camera.
Again.
This is our 4th episode and our 4th camera.
It's true.
But I feel like we've landed on a good one.
I like it.
Yeah, it's clear, and we don't have a fishbowl effect.
Yeah, that was the problem with the camera number 2.
Right, and then camera number 3 was my phone.
Which the audio, like, the quality was great, but there were, like, all the things I still have to edit around.
Well, and I, honestly, because I am apparently now elderly in the world of technology, did not realize that my phone wouldn't notify me, like, while we were filming. And so we finished filming after, like, an hour and a half, and I realized, like, I had, like, my husband had tried to call me, my, like, just people that
Life
legitimately, like, needed to get a hold of me during the workday, and I was just like, my phone isn't ringing.
Called boundaries.
I'm not sure you're supposed to have boundaries from your work population in the middle of your workday.
Well, you know what?
So yes, this is camera number 4. Thanks to Amy and Erin McConaughey for letting us borrow it.
It's not even our camera.
Also, Amy recommended, and this is because she knows me, although she doesn't know you as well. She knows you well enough to know. She said, "You guys aren't doing this live, are you?" I was like, no, we would 100% say something we shouldn't.
Can't do that.
And get in trouble.
Yeah.
Because she's like, I would really recommend a script. And I'm like, well, we're never going to be scripted. So recording is the next best thing.
Honestly. So I was really grateful that the radio interview I did was not live on air, but rather like recorded. I was like, okay, this gives me the chance. Like if I mess it up, which I don't think I did. I haven't listened to it yet.
Did he send it to you?
No.
Okay. Well.
So I don't know. Maybe
it's
I did
only
mess
helpful
it up.
if they let you listen.
Maybe I did mess it up. Well, it hasn't aired yet. So,
okay. Well, once it airs, it's too late then. I mean.
Yeah, it's just gone at that point. It's just out there.
So that was the scariest thing when I did the hearing, which we can link in the bio to both the radio thing, because it will have aired by the time this airs, hopefully. And we can link to the thing I did in October, that horrible October. Mm-hmm. But when I testified in front of that committee, that subcommittee, it wasn't recorded. Like it was live, and I was in the hot seat, and it was tense. Yeah. Because I'm thinking like I'm pregnant and kind of hormonal and really tired, and I could say something any moment. And I knew that donors were watching, which was really cool because like it was that you could feel that like support.
Yeah.
Like I
specifically just to see like, here we are doing our thing and you can watch it.
Yeah. And so you could see people signing on their Zoom and like just like black screen in their names. You could see who they were. And I mean like John Smith. I mean, I don't know, is he our John Smith or someone else's Jeff Walensky signed on. And I was like, there can't be two Jeff Walenskys interested in this. Like I know that's my Jeff Walensky. Like
shout out to Jeff.
Shout out to Jeff. I mean, but honestly, that was the moment when I was like, if Jeff is out here watching, there's other people watching and they're praying for me.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But also I was like, please don't say anything stupid, Sarah, and embarrass yourself in front of like all the supporters of Promise of Life Network and possibly your bosses and definitely the people you work with. But it worked out.
It's fine.
It worked out.
It's fine. And hopefully the radio thing is fine and it's all fine.
And hopefully this is fine.
I can edit it if it's not fine. That's the beauty of it.
The sad thing is that means if someone does find something, then we tried. Didn't know you just missed it.
It's true.
But anyway, welcome to episode number 4 with our new camera. So today we are going to talk about the Dobbs decision, and how that impacted the United States, and a little bit about Roe v. Wade, not a ton, and then we'll talk about we'll kind of segue into the at-home abortion issue and how Dobbs kind of made that more or less a thing in the United States. So I'll start talk about Dobbs. So obviously we all know Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for decades. And basically what happened, and there is Sarah's non-lawyer like summary of what happened.
Yeah, says we're not legal experts.
We are not. We're not. No, we're not. But most of what I'm going to say came from a legal expert. So I wouldn't necessarily say
we consulted legal experts.
We have consulted legal experts. There we go. So when Roe v. Wade was decided, because people always say passed, it wasn't a law, it was a decision, which is totally different, or at least extremely different. And so when Roe v. Wade was decided, only 4 states in our nation had similar laws. And one of those states was New York, obviously. And New York's law had actually almost been like thrown out like the year before. So pro-lifers were on the ground, even in the early 70s. I mean, people always like to say like, oh, pro-lifers were asleep at the wheel. And I'm like, they really weren't. I mean, hindsight's 20/20, first of all. But yeah, there were lots of people that were advocating for pro-life laws and pro-life health. There were maternity homes. There were like the YWCA would be considered a pro-life outreach. There were organizations for unwed mothers. There were organizations for orphans. There were organizations for girls who were coming in from the country or from other countries to work in the cities to make sure they had safe places to live so they weren't becoming, prostitutes or exploited. There was stuff happening. Right. And I think people like to be like, oh, nothing was happening. And it was. But so Roe v. Wade's decided, all of a sudden, every state has to allow abortion up to viability. And the problem with viability is it's a moving target, because in the 70s, viability was pretty much 24 weeks, and that was if you were lucky. Right. Like if all the stars aligned and everything happened perfectly, a 24-weeker could survive. They now have 21-weekers surviving. Mm-hmm. And I know that locally, if you give birth at 22 weeks, they will intervene, and they have a reasonably high success rate. So, I mean, viability is getting younger, I don't want to say all the time, but it's getting younger.
Yeah.
And so as years wear on, it kind of made it like very stagnant, because it's kind of like, okay, well, we can't really push for reforms in our state because Roe exists.
Right.
And so there's only so much litigation you can do. And Pennsylvania did a lot of really good litigation. We limited abortion at viability, like after viability. So 24 weeks you couldn't have an abortion unless, some dire circumstance, which almost never happened because you could
Right.
just deliver. And you had to have like a 24-hour waiting period. At one point, there was an ultrasound requirement, and then that was thrown out. At one point, they tried to make it so if you were married, you had to notify your husband, and then they threw that out. So, like, there was a lot of like efforts made to have a pretty firm abortion control act, which is what our law is called. And then there's other states like California, New York, Delaware, where it was abortion up till birth for basically any reason.
Yeah.
But there was always that floor of it. You really can't go below viability.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then people start challenging it, and I think it started with Texas, with the heartbeat law, and they did theirs different, and that's why they didn't go to the Supreme Court, just because the enforcement mechanism was really odd, although it worked. But Dobbs ended up going to the Supreme Court, and the Dobbs decision basically was like, hey, we're going to limit abortion at this earlier gestation. I'm like blanking on how many weeks. Was it like 11 or 12 weeks?
Something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't heartbeat.
No,
but it definitely wasn't viability either. And ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, hey, we're going to rule in the favor of Dobbs, which means, and this is what came out of it, now states can make their own decision regarding their abortion laws.
Yeah.
Do you want to expound on that at all?
Well, I think it's important to note, like, when we talk about the Dobbs decision, this is essentially, it was Dobbs versus, I think, Jackson Women's Center.
Yeah.
Yeah. Out of Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is what escalated to the Supreme Court, and
Right.
the Supreme Court made a ruling
in favor of
Dobbs. Yeah, because Dobbs was the one that was arguing, like, nope, this is a state level issue.
Yeah.
And
we can limit abortion to this gestational age if we want to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Jackson Women's Center was arguing, no, you can't because of Roe.
Right.
And essentially the Supreme Court was like, well, what if we just got rid of Roe?
Right. And Roe was objectively bad law. And a lot of people said that it was objectively bad law. That even if you take away the moral implications, it was just not a well done case.
Right.
And so it really should not have taken this long.
No.
To reverse it. But
there's a lot of misinformation about what Roe v. Wade actually was about.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and we did this in the first recording of this episode, because this is not the first time that we have recorded.
Also why we got a new camera. Because the last camera was like halfway through, was just like, what
froze.
if I stopped filming? What if I did that? But didn't tell us. No.
And it's not even frozen in like a good, it's like, it's really bad.
Well, and the thing is, like, we can see us being recorded, and that continued on just fine.
Yeah.
Like, it looked good.
It was fake. It was all a lie. But in the first recording of this episode, we talked about how, in my circles, people talk about Roe v. Wade as a privacy issue.
Yes.
It was all about privacy. And, like, people, and I'm guessing I don't know if it's just millennials, if it's just left,
like old millennial.
Like, politically left conversations. I don't know why. Like, I don't know who started the rumor.
I think that originally when it was ruled, it was focused on privacy as well.
Right, but it's abortion.
Yeah.
It's about abortion.
It's not about privacy.
It's privacy in relation to abortion.
Yeah.
But they talk about it as if it was like this big privacy act, and it's like, let's get real. Yeah. It's like
we have privacy. We have plenty of privacy laws.
Yeah.
We have plenty of privacy laws in the nation.
They're a good thing. Like, we should have privacy laws.
But Roe was not one of them.
Roe was not. It was not it.
No. It was not it.
It was not it. So I think it's important to talk about, because I think some people simply don't know. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, do you not know because you don't know, or do you not know because you don't want to know?
Right. And I would say that in this instance,
or because someone is deceiving you.
Yes, because people are being deceived. And if you've been told your whole life that you can only trust mainstream media, you're not going to know. Yeah. But you're going to feel like, if I go to this other media source,
you're going to get bullied.
You feel like you're going to get bullied, or you feel like it's like, are they lying to me because I've never heard this before in my life? Right. And I think that's extremely problematic. So it's always good to go back to the source. You can read the Roe v. Wade decision. I read it. I read Dobbs. I don't always remember every little like jot and tittle, but I've read it. Yeah, and I listened to all the arguments for Dobbs too, because you can go online. I mean, all of this stuff is available, and you can. I mean, I doubt you could listen to the Roe arguments, but you could at least read them, and you could read the actual decision.
Yeah.
So one of the big fear factors, and I think this is so relevant for us because both of us were born under Roe, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I'm 36.
Roe v. Wade has always been.
Yeah, my mom could have had an abortion. I mean, obviously she didn't, and she didn't want
Yeah.
to, but she could have. Your mom could have. You
Yeah.
know, this was just life.
Yeah.
And I think that there's that fear factor of like, okay, we've lived our whole lives under Roe. We've had this, freedom to abort. What happens now? And the reality is that as what 2 years post Dobbs,
Yeah.
is it almost?
Yeah, it's coming up. I think next week.
Yeah,
is the 2-year anniversary.
and no one's died because of Dobbs.
Nope.
Right? Like it was all this women are going to die, women are going to die of these back alley. I mean, or have they died in back alley abortions? Probably. That to me, that's not the same thing. But women are not like being forced to carry these dangerous pregnancies and ending up dead. Like it's just not happening.
Well, and again, going back to where people get their information from, most of the states that had trigger laws, right? So some states anticipating that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned had laws that were ready to go. So when that happened, they were, putting restrictions on abortion after heartbeats detected or 11 weeks. There's variety into how states have decided to handle it. And a lot of people were thinking that when that happens, I mean, there was a lot of fear mongering. That's the only word I can think of is fear mongering.
Yeah.
Going on that women were going to be like, if you were having a miscarriage, you were going to be prosecuted, which is
the government tracking our period.
The government tracking our period. I think about it every time. I'm just like, the government is tracking all sorts of things, and I'm pretty sure it's not my period.
If the government is tracking my period, I think it should be a text once
a
month and let me know because I'm not tracking my period. Like send a complimentary box of supplies to my house.
Honestly,
that would be really helpful.
But honestly, like people were talking about like how to handle that, and I saw a lot of stuff online. Being a millennial, a young millennial, like I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and the conversation surrounding what was going to happen or what people think is happening post-Dobbs is just bizarre. The government's not tracking your period out.
They don't have the time.
They don't have the time. Have you seen the United States government?
We are not pulled together to track somebody's period out. And this idea that women can't get health care is just bogus. Like, if you need to be treated during pregnancy, you can be treated during pregnancy. And some of that, there is a certain amount of finesse. Like, there are doctors that are afraid of getting in trouble, and maybe they don't always make the right decision. But the reality is they should have the freedom to treat a woman, even if that treatment causes harm to the unborn child, if the woman needs the treatment, right? Like, you have two patients in a pregnancy, mother and child. And so it's not just the mother and it's not just the child. We need to balance their needs against each other. And doctors should be able to do that without having to resort to abortion.
Right. So, women are not being prosecuted for miscarrying.
Or anything.
Or anything, or having abortions. Like,
right. It is not illegal to go to a neighboring state and get an abortion and come home. That was another thing. They're they're going to have like border dogs sniffing you.
Well, that kind of segues into life post-Dobbs. And like what has the effects of Dobbs actually been. And again, a lot of it is fear-mongering, but one of the issues that came to light, I mean, it's been around for a while, you know this, I know this, but something that really got the spotlight after the Dobbs decision came down was the at-home abortion. Here in the States, specifically the chemical abortion issue or the abortion pills.
Right.
Has kind of, and that's kind of what's in the news right now. I mean, there's court cases ruling. In fact, I think
the FDA the Supreme Court just said the FDA is fine, which
it's not. So even the Supreme Court is fallible, obviously.
I think it's pretty clear.
Obviously.
Everyone's fallible.
Well, I also think a lot of people thought, like, when the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade, that it was just like, look at this super pro-life, like, Supreme Court that
they'll do anything pro-life.
Yeah, and it's like, no, actually, that was the Supreme Court acknowledging that it was a bogus law, or, like a bogus ruling to begin with. It was not a pro-life ruling. It was, we done messed up ruling.
Right, like 50 years ago.
And so, about that. Yeah, and we're very appreciative of that. Like, I'm not, I'm super grateful for all of the legislation and the politicians that put in work to get to that point. But, like, let's not fool ourselves. We're not a pro-life nation.
No, we're not.
And it's not a pro-life Supreme Court.
No, not really. I mean, there are pro-life people on the Supreme Court, but they're still very limited in what they can do. And they're not tyrants that can just make decisions left and right based on what they want. You know, they have to look at the Constitution and the law, and they have to look at precedent, and they have to look at the strength of each case. And that's a lot. I mean, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there was so much fear. One of the big things was, you know, women aren't going to be treated for ectopic pregnancy, which is ridiculous. Women can absolutely be treated for an ectopic pregnancy, even in a state that restricts abortion. And then the other one that I saw, and we still see this, are women are terrified of like going for help to someone in their own state. Or they're convinced that if they go to another state and they have an abortion and they go back to their pro-life state, that they're going to get in trouble. And so we even get girls, I shouldn't say girls, but clients, patients, whatever, who call us from pro-life kind of life states, you know, where they have restricted abortion significantly. And they'll call us because we're in Pennsylvania and be like, hey, I don't know what to do. I want to have an abortion, but I'm in, you know, Texas or something. And we're like, no, you can go to a pregnancy center in your state. Like, you can go and talk about your options.
Yeah, they're not going to call the
they're
police.
Not gonna, no, they're not going to call the police. Like, that's not what we do.
No.
Unless you're like actively punching someone inside the pregnancy center, no one is calling the police.
I don't want to deal with the police.
Well, it's just like I think they think that we're like poised to, you know, jump down anyone's throat that chooses abortion. That's just not who we are. It's not what we do. And so yeah, it kind of became like much ado about nothing. And there are definitely states that have restricted abortion, and I'm sure there are women. I know there are women who have chosen life because of that, but that's not a bad thing.
No.
And I have talked to women who would probably never say this like super publicly, because they're actually pro-choice and they would see it as being like they don't want to be pro-life or they don't want to help pro-life. But when I was pregnant with the twins and my amniotic sac ruptured super early, I was in a group for women who had that happen. And one woman was really clear. She was like, yeah, I 100% would have had an abortion if I had been in a state that allowed it, and my state didn't. And I'm so glad, because now I have my kid and they're doing great. And so that's a side that isn't talked about much. Of like, I wanted an abortion, I couldn't get an abortion, and it actually worked out like super well.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's what laws are made for, right? To keep us from harming ourselves and others.
Yeah.
I mean, I might want to drive 150 miles into work every day, but eventually it's going to cause some harm. And at the end of the day, I should be grateful that the law exists to prevent me from harming myself or harming someone else.
Yeah. And we need that. I mean, human nature, we need rules
and boundaries
yep.
And we need people oversight. Who are willing to
and that's a very biblical, I mean, like, that's, I know that there's a lot of people who are kind of like rah the government can't tell us what to do. But the Bible talks about like, no, like, God appoints, you know, leaders and we're to follow those leaders. You know, to a certain extent there are limitations there, but having oversight is not an inherently bad thing. It can be a great thing when it's done really, really well.
Yeah. And even when it's done okay.
Yeah. Even just mediocre. Like, keeps babies alive.
It keeps babies alive. It keeps people from driving crazy fast. It keeps people from robbing other people. It keeps people from, I mean, there's tons of laws that protect us from each other.
Yeah.
Just the other day, actually texted my sister a photo. I'll send it to you and you can like throw it up on the screen. I got pulled over.
Oh.
Which immediately I know that I've done nothing wrong because I drive like everyone's grandma.
Okay.
Right? Like, I am so conservative in my driving. I've never gotten a speeding ticket my entire life. Like,
Good for you.
Yeah. You're like, let's not talk about speeding tickets.
Good for you.
And so I'm like, is everything okay? And he's like, I am so sorry to pull you over. I wanted to let you know that your taillight was out. And I was like, oh my goodness, my taillight. And he's like, yeah, I didn't want you to get in trouble. And I was like, thank you so much. And we had this like great interaction. And I realized not every interaction with the police is like that.
Yeah.
But like, because I wasn't doing anything wrong, my first instinct was not fear of like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get in trouble.
Right.
Like, my first instinct is a piece falling off of my car. I mean, you've seen my
It's
car.
a valid
instinct.
It's a valid concern.
And we had like a very genial conversation.
Yeah.
And I went home and I told my husband, like, hey, can you replace the light bulb in my taillight?
Yeah. My last interaction with the cop was about my headlight. I had an out headlight. And he was very polite about it and was just like, hey, like, you need to get this fixed. And I was like, man, I didn't even notice because apparently I'm not super observant. I don't know.
Like, well, and then I felt bad because I feel like someone did tell me my taillight was out, but I just moved on with my life.
Yeah, see, I had no idea, and it had just gone out. So it was, but again, like, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was reasonably sure I hadn't been speeding at the time. I can't, I guess, 100% say. But I was convinced I hadn't been speeding, and if I was, he didn't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
all of this to
so
say,
all that to say, like, laws protecting us from harming ourselves or other people, even unintentionally, are good things.
yes,
And laws protecting us from harming unborn children are good things.
it's not oppression.
No.
It's not a right.
No.
Lo and behold, killing another human being, and that's like, we'll just call a spade here,
Right.
is not actually a right.
Even if not killing that human being is inconvenient and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like,
it's frustrating to be like, you know what, you're an inconvenience. Let me get
rid of you.
Yeah.
Well, and it's I forget what the name of it is, but there's like a logical argument for this. So I've had approximately 700 children in my life, and roughly give or take. And so pregnancy is inconvenient. It's uncomfortable. It's the end, especially very, very uncomfortable, and it changes your body. Sure. I am not the girl I was when I was 20. I'm bigger. Okay. A bigger person, and not just emotionally. Anyway, so but it's this idea that you can't, someone's life is worth so much more than your convenience and your comfort. It's like this: if I invited you over to my house, this is the scenario they use when they describe this. If I invite you over to my house and I'm like, hey, Mikayla, like, come on over, we're gonna play games, we're gonna have dinner, it's gonna be great, and you're like, okay, Sarah, I'm gonna come over, and you walk to my house, because in this scenario we live, like, I don't know, a mile apart, and you wanted to walk to my house. And then in the middle of our evening together, I get mad at you and I'm like, I don't want you at my house. Get out. But the problem is, now this horrible snowstorm has blown up and you will die. Like, you can't call an Uber. You didn't bring your car. You have no shelter. You'd have to walk in the elements to get to your home again. And it is unreasonable for me to invite you into my home and then change my mind if that changing of my mind results in your potential death, because your life is worth more than my comfort in that moment.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I invited you over.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about pregnancy, unless we're talking about rape or incest, which can talk about,
but it's also like a very small percentage.
It's like 1%.
And
it might even be less than 1%.
Yeah, I was like, and they even go as far as to say that that's probably an overblown statistic.
Right. Yes. And we can talk about that because we are also pro-life in cases of rape and incest.
Absolutely.
100%. But now let's just set that aside for a moment. When a woman and a man engage in sex, they are essentially inviting a pregnancy.
Yeah.
Now you could.
It is a very natural consequence.
Yeah, that's like me inviting you over for dinner and then locking all of my doors and hoping you can't get it.
I'm feeling a little bullied. Oh, the snowstorm, I don't get any dinner. Like, what did I ever do to you?
What I'm having, I feel like you would get in. Like, if I was like, we're having kimbap. Yeah. You would be like, heck, if I'm gonna let this locked door.
I'll go in through a window.
I'm coming in. And I'll look up and you'll be at the table.
There's gotta be a metaphor for like the accuracy of birth control in this somewhere.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
Locked doors aren't even 100%.
No, they're not. If you are having,
there's always a window.
If someone is having sex, your body, your partner's, I said husband, like that's not normally the case, but your partner's body are designed to procreate. Your hormones are designed to procreate. Your body's designed to procreate. Like, your body wants to procreate. So all the birth control in the world is trying to subvert a very natural process. Yeah. It's not going to be 100% effective.
Nope, it's not.
So if you become pregnant, you got to just stick it out. And it's okay to say that. Yeah. And I don't mean you. I mean you also, but I mean everyone. In general, yes. You. Yeah. Yeah. And 9 months of discomfort and is not worth someone else's life. Yeah, it's just not.
So, all of this to say, the Dobbs decision was a thing that happened. Mm-hmm. It came down. Abortion is not illegal. That's another like misconception. Yeah. Is that abortion is now illegal. It is not. It just meant that it goes back to the states, and states decide how they want to handle it. And some states, there were drastic changes and trigger laws went into place, and now abortion is heavily restricted. Mm-hmm. Other states, like
the
Pennsylvania,
shifted like really rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of them were preparing for it, right? Because it leaked,
right? Well, and even before that, they knew somebody was on making the trajectory, right? Like, if Roe was on its way out. Yeah, everyone knew that. Yeah, we didn't know if it would be the Dobbs case, but everyone is like, it's time. It's time. Yeah. And so, like Pennsylvania's laws didn't change.
Yeah. I was about to say, like, here for Promise of Life Network, I don't think anything changed really. I guess now we get more clients from other states that are inquiring about abortion.
Yeah, we get a lot of that. And the home abortion thing, has gone up even in states where abortion is not restricted. And I thought that most women would be seeking the abortion, home abortion, abortion pills in like specifically red states or life states or however you want to look at it. And then
Sure.
when we first got a message from someone, and it was from like not this city, because I'm not going to share the actual city, but like kind of like a San Diego kind of city.
So someplace where abortion was widely available.
Right. You could go
very
to a
easily
clinic.
accessible.
You were like, it was extremely easy to get to. It was legal. And we
Yeah.
had someone reaching out asking for the home abortion. And that was like a huge red flag to me.
Right.
Because I was like, oh my goodness, this isn't a red state issue. Like, this is a national issue. And I think there's a couple reasons. One of them is it's easy.
Yeah.
It's cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's private.
Right.
And privacy is a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think there's also that element. There's also a huge element of like abuse.
Right. So, and we've dealt with this where women are using the at-home abortion or are being forced to use the
Right.
at-home abortion as a means for covering up something much more like deeper and more sinister,
Yeah.
I would say.
Like rape or
yeah.
trafficking.
Or human trafficking.
Yeah. Or even just, girl's pregnant, she wants the baby, and mom and dad don't want her to.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you're taking these pills.
Yeah.
And that's happened.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that abortion clinics are like a bastion of like morality that are going to intervene in every negative situation, because obviously we've seen that doesn't happen.
Right.
But at least, there's always a chance that someone at the abortion clinic would be like, hey, things are not right here.
Yeah.
Like, this girl doesn't want to be here.
Yeah. Or like going
she's too
to
young.
a doctor's office for a pregnancy test first, or an ultrasound, or even like going to a pregnancy center. Like, there are things in place. And I know here at Promise of Life, we have things in place to screen any client for a variety of issues that come hand in hand with abortion. And I think a lot of people don't like to talk about the fact that abortion goes hand in hand with a lot of these other issues that even pro-choice people would say, like, no, we don't support that.
Right.
But abortion covers up a lot of abuse cases, a lot of human trafficking cases. And I think some abortion clinics know this. And we've seen, you can do a quick Google search and find
there
videos
is, unfortunately, video evidence of of abortion clinics covering up.
Knowing that there was a trafficking issue or prostitutes, things like that, and blindly looking the other way, or worse, giving advice on how to
cover it up.
On how to cover that up. And this, again, there's video evidence of this elsewhere. You can go find it. But kind of going back to the theme of the day, I wonder how many people just don't know that abortion goes hand in hand with all of this. They don't think about it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them would rather not know. It's easier if you just don't think about it.
Yeah. And I think too, there's a certain element of like, well, I wouldn't want a woman to be forced to do X, Y, or Z, or a woman in a really terrible situation. And there are women in really terrible situations.
Absolutely.
And we meet with them.
Yes.
Like, they're being abused, or they're homeless, or they're food insecure, or they're unwell, or the list goes on. But there's also women, and I want to say this very carefully because I don't want to diminish anyone's life circumstances.
Right.
But there's also a significant number of women who choose abortion simply because it is convenient.
Yeah.
And they often don't realize the ramifications.
Nope.
Because we have, as a culture, we have really pushed this idea that abortion is easy and quick and no big deal, and everyone does it, and it's
just like getting your period.
Right. You just move on, and it's not a big deal. And women often find out later that it is a very, very big deal.
Yeah.
But it's just not a good time to have a baby, and that's something that we hear from a lot of young women. And sometimes that sentence, "it's not a good time," can be covering up or representing like a very big deal, like abuse, or even trafficking, or poverty, or whatever. Or it could simply be like, I don't want to interrupt my college experience, or my parents will get mad, or whatever. And so sometimes we can address that, and we can say, okay, like, you're worried about college, let's talk about protections. Or you're worried about your job, let's talk about legal protections that you have. Or you're worried about housing, like, let's talk about housing programs. But when it's really just, it's just not a good time, sometimes it's really hard to address that.
Yeah.
And like, I think those laws, those boundaries then can help protect not just the baby, but also the mother. And it's not because women are dumb. Like, we're women, we're not dumb. I'm super smart.
You're super smart.
Oh, I was
that,
like,
that was for me. No.
wow.
No, it was more like, yeah, you're really smart, and I'm just kind of like, I'm hanging in there, you know?
But
I've made it this far.
but there's a certain amount of like early pregnancy, your hormones are all over the place, your mind is all over the place, you're scared, no matter how planned it was, you're scared to death.
Yeah, it was like women are making ultimately life or death decisions at a moment in their life where they are, incredibly vulnerable for a
Yes.
lot of reasons. Even if
Yeah.
you're not financially vulnerable or, like food insecure or anything like that, you're just vulnerable. There's a lot going on in your body, in your mind, and even in the best of circumstances, like you were saying,
Absolutely.
it's crazy.
Because all of a sudden you feel terrible. Like your stomach hurts, you can't eat, you're emotional, you're exhausted. I mean, it's a lot. The first trimester is really hard. And not having abortion as an option, personally, I think is better.
Yeah.
Because it takes it off the table.
Yeah.
And really terrible options deserve to be taken off the table.
Yeah. So all of this is kind of, it's ongoing. So to kind of wrap this up, the Dobbs decision was an incredible step forward for the pro-life movement in that it kicked abortion back to the states. But it's not just some miraculous cure-all.
It's not. We have a lot of work to do.
There's a lot of work to do because now, instead of having kind of like this one big battle, we have 50 more battles.
Little to moderate to large.
Yeah, I was like, and they're all about the same thing.
And I would love for someone to make a federal law saying that we found a right to life in the Constitution and all abortion is illegal in the United States.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't think that's going to happen. At least not without a lot of culture work.
No, and it also wouldn't stop abortion.
You know what we should do to help the culture? We should start a podcast.
We should start a podcast.
All right.
We should start a pregnancy center.
We should run a chat line.
These are some pretty grand ideas, huh?
Yeah, we should work on that. What do you guys think?
Someone do it.
Yeah. So, that brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. But before we close, let's just bring it back to Jesus. Let's bring it back to the Bible. And I think the thing that resonates with me whenever I talk about Dobbs or I talk about the abortion issue is we are not fighting against flesh and blood. But we're fighting against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. Because logically, abortion doesn't make sense.
Right.
But so if you take the spiritual element out of it and we pretend that we're not in a good versus evil battle, that we pretend there is no God, there is no Satan, abortion doesn't make sense. Because every human species is programmed to advance itself.
Right.
To procreate.
Yeah.
To become larger. And I understand that there's animals that kill their young. Like, don't come at me with that. But it doesn't make sense because you look at it, women are harmed by it. Women they struggle with it, they deal with it. But then when you add in the fact that we are good versus evil, that we are God versus Satan, that we're Christians versus the world, abortion starts to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Because
abortion destroys families and women are the givers of life.
Yeah.
Like, we have a really special role in creation. We're the only gender of two, in case anyone's wondering, that can participate in creation with God.
Yeah.
And bring someone into existence. And I understand that men are part of that too. Like, I'm not saying they're not, but like, we get to grow this child, this special little person inside of us, and then support them even after they're born by breastfeeding and nurturing and caring for them. And that's really beautiful. And Satan doesn't like that.
Yeah.
So there you go. It's a spiritual battle. And we have to fight it on spiritual terms.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, like I said, like, Dobbs is great, but ultimately what we're fighting here is not a political issue. It's a hard issue.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's tough.
It is. But I think we will prevail. We will.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. I read that in the book. And
you read the end of the book.
I skipped forward.
Oh, you just read straight through.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. We will see you next week, and probably with the same awesome camera because it's fantastic.
Same awesome outfit.
We'll see you later. Like and subscribe. Join our Facebook group. Have a great day.